The year was 1986, and inside the great hall of the Moscow Conservatory the air felt heavy. It wasn't just because the building was old and grand, or because thousands of people were packed tightly into the velvet seats. It was heavy because of history. For over 60 years this man had been away. He had left Russia as a young man and became a legend everywhere else in the world, but he had never come back. Until now, the audience didn't just sit there. They leaned forward. They held their breath. They were waiting for Vladimir Horowitz. At 82 years old, he was considered the greatest pianist alive. But in reality, looking at him backstage, he didn't look like a superhero. He looked like a very old, very tired grandfather. He was thin and pale, and his hands, which were famous for playing magic on the keys, were trembling slightly. The stakes were incredibly high. This wasn't just a concert. It was a television broadcast beamed across the entire Soviet Union. The government officials were sitting in the VIP boxes, watching closely. They wanted everything to be perfect. They wanted to show the world that Russia produced the best art and the best artists. But Horowitz wasn't thinking about politics or television right now. He was thinking about the piano. Sitting in the middle of the stage was a massive, shiny black Steinway. It looked beautiful. It was polished until it reflected the lights like a mirror. To the technicians and the organizers, this machine was a masterpiece of engineering. It was the best piano they had. But to Horowitz, it was a stranger. He walked onto the stage for the final sound check, moving slowly. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. He pressed down. A sound came out loud and clear, but Horowitz shook his head. To the audience, the notes probably sounded fine, but to him the piano felt dead. The keys were too heavy to push down. It felt like he was typing on a stone block instead of playing on an instrument that could sing. He tried again, playing a fast run of notes. It was clumsy. He couldn't get the sound out of it fast enough. The bright, ringing tone he loved was missing. Panic began to rise in his chest. He was a perfectionist. He couldn't play a concert on an instrument that fought against him. He turned to his personal tuner, a man who traveled everywhere with him, and began to whisper frantically. He wanted the action changed. He wanted the felt softer. He wanted the sound to be warmer. The tuner looked nervous. They were minutes away from going live. You can't rebuild a piano in 5 minutes. The conductor of the orchestra, distinguished man named Yuri, was watching from the side of the stage. He was feeling the pressure too. The orchestra was warmed up and ready. The TV cameras were rolling. The schedule was written in stone. He saw Horowitz frowning. He saw the old man hovering over the keyboard, boo-manny with the sound. Yuri knew that if Horowitz wasn't happy, there would be no concert. But the delay was making him sweat. The Soviet officials were starting to tap their watches. Backstage, it was chaotic. People in suits were whispering into radios. Stagehands were shifting cables. Horowitz blocked it all out. He was locked in a battle with the black beast in front of him. He played a chord, then another, his face twisting in frustration. He felt that the piano was an enemy he couldn't conquer. He was old, his energy was low, and if the piano was too hard, his hands would cramp up before the first piece was even finished. He looked out at the empty hall. In just a few minutes, it would be filled with people who had waited their whole lives to hear him. He couldn't let them down. But he also couldn't play this instrument. He remembered seeing another piano earlier, a smaller one, kept in the shadows of the wings just in case. It wasn't the official concert piano. It was just a spare. But Horowitz had a feeling about it. He knew, with the instinct of a master, that the spare piano might be the one that held the magic. The tension in the theater was tightening like a violin string. The conductor checked his watch one last time and took a step toward the piano. The audience was murmuring now, waiting for the curtain to rise. Something had to give. The conductor was standing on the podium, his baton raised in the air. He looked like a statue, but inside he was boiling. The audience was quiet, waiting for the first sound. The musicians in the orchestra had their instruments ready, their breath held. The red light on the TV cameras was on, broadcasting the silence to millions of people across the country. But the music wasn't starting. The conductor stood there, his arm getting tired. Staring at the pianist, Horowitz was ignoring the conductor completely. He was leaning over the keyboard, whispering urgently to his personal tuner. He was tapping the side of the piano, pointing to the strings inside, shaking his head. To the conductor, this looked like madness. They were live on television. You don't tune a piano while the whole world is watching. You play the music. Finally, the conductor couldn't take it anymore. He lowered his baton and walked off the podium, marching across the stage toward the piano. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the huge silent hall. The audience watched, confused. Was the concert canceled? Was someone sick? When the conductor reached the piano, the atmosphere became dangerous. He wasn't just a conductor anymore. He was a man pushed to his limit. He looked down at the old pianist, frustration written all over his face. Horowitz didn't look up. He was too busy worrying about the sound. He knew that if he played this heavy, unresponsive piano, his fingers would fail him. He needed an instrument that would help him, not fight him. He turned to the tuner and gestured wildly toward the dark wings of the stage. He wanted the other piano. He wanted the spare one, the one nobody thought was good enough for a broadcast. The conductor heard him. He looked at the shiny, official black piano, and then he looked at the darkness where the spare piano sat. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. They were about to play one of the most difficult concertos ever written, on the most important night in years, and this old man wanted to swap the pianos now? It seemed impossible. It seemed disrespectful to the orchestra and the people waiting. The tension snapped. The conductor leaned down, getting close to Horowitz's ear. He didn't whisper softly. His voice was sharp, like a knife cutting through the air. "Don't touch my piano," he hissed. He didn't literally mean the piano belonged to him. He meant the setup, the stage, the plan. He meant that they were going to play on the instrument that was provided, and they were going to do it right now. He was the boss of the orchestra, and for this one night, he felt like he needed to be the boss of the stage too. He was used to control. He was used to musicians following his baton, but he had never dealt with a superstar like this. For a second, time seemed to stop. The orchestra members shifted in their seats, looking at each other with wide eyes. They couldn't hear the words, but they saw the anger. They saw the confrontation. The people in the front rows leaned forward, sensing the drama. It wasn't a musical moment. It was a human clash. Two strong wills crashing into each other center stage. Horowitz finally looked up. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He just looked tired and incredibly stubborn. He was 82 years old. He had survived revolutions, wars, and the pressure of being the best in the world for half a century. A shouting conductor was not going to scare him. He waved his hand dismissively, as if the conductor were just a fly that was buzzing around his head. The conductor stood up straight, his face red. He realized he couldn't force the old man to play. If he tried, Horowitz might just walk off the stage and the concert would be a disaster. The officials in the boxes would be furious. The audience would riot. He had no choice. He had to give in, but he wasn't happy about it. Horowitz turned his attention back to the wings. He snapped his fingers, signaling the stagehands. The technicians in the shadows scrambled. They realized they actually had to do it. They had to move the massive, heavy concert grand piano off the stage and bring the spare one out. This was dangerous. Moving a 1,000-pound instrument in complete silence, with the clock ticking, was a recipe for disaster. But the maestro had spoken. The stagehands moved like ghosts. They lifted the heavy pedals and unlocked the wheels. The conductor, realizing he couldn't just stand there glaring, stomped back to the podium. He felt humiliated. He felt like his authority had been stripped away. But as he turned his back, he saw a glint of determination in the old man's eyes that made him pause. Maybe, just maybe, Horowitz knew what he was doing. The sound of the piano being rolled across the floor broke the silence. It was a low, rumbling growl. The audience whispered in surprise. They saw the black monster being pushed away into the darkness, replaced by the smaller, plainer instrument. It looked like a scene from a play. The good piano was rejected. The ugly duckling was taking its place in the spotlight. Horowitz sat on the bench, waiting. He wasn't looking at the conductor anymore. He was focused entirely on this new, unfamiliar instrument. He was betting his reputation and the success of the entire night on a hunch. The conductor picked up his baton, his hands shaking slightly now, not from age, but from nerves and adrenaline. He took a deep breath, signaling to the orchestra that they were about to witness something very strange, or something very special. The moment of truth had arrived. The silence that fell over the great hall was different now. It wasn't just the quiet of people waiting for a concert to start. It was the tense, heavy silence of a crowd wondering if a disaster was about to happen. The stagehands had finished their frantic work. The big, shiny concert piano was gone. In its place sat the smaller, darker instrument. It didn't look as impressive. It looked a bit plain, like a humble servant standing next to a king. But to Horowitz, it looked like hope. The old pianist sat down on the bench slowly. His movements were careful, deliberate. You could see that his body was fragile, his bones brittle under his tuxedo. He reached out and touched the keys gently, almost as if he were petting a cat. He didn't play a melody yet. He just pressed down a few keys, one by one, listening to the voice of this new machine. The conductor stood at the podium, watching closely. He was still annoyed, his jaw tight, but he was also curious. He had to play with this man, and if the piano sounded bad, they would all look foolish. But then, something changed in the air. Horowitz played a chord as simple, major chord. The sound that came out wasn't the tinny, bright ring of the previous piano. It was warm. It was deep and velvety, with a dark, rich tone that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The old man's face, which had been tight with worry just moments before, suddenly softened. His eyes closed for a split second. A tiny, almost invisible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He knew this was the one. This instrument was willing to sing for him. He ran a quick scale up the keyboard. His fingers, which had been trembling with nerves earlier, suddenly looked steady. The keys offered just the right amount of resistance. They felt soft, like butter. He didn't have to force the sound out of the piano. The piano gave it to him willingly. It was a connection that only a true master could feel. It wasn't just wood and wire anymore. It was an extension of his own body. The conductor saw the change. He saw the tension leave Horowitz's shoulders. He realized that the difficult old man wasn't trying to be difficult on purpose. Horowitz was searching for this specific sound. Without it, the magic wouldn't happen. The conductor felt a wave of relief wash over him. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy idea was going to work. He adjusted his glasses, took a deep breath to center himself, and raised his baton. He looked at the orchestra to give them the signal. The musicians were focused, their eyes glued to the conductor, waiting to jump in at the exact right moment. The piece they were about to play was Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto. It is famously one of the hardest pieces ever written for the instrument. It is massive, loud, and technically terrifying. For a young musician, it's a challenge. For an 82-year-old man, it should have been impossible. The audience knew this. They held their programs tightly, whispering prayers or just crossing their fingers. They wanted to believe in the legend. But common sense told them that an old body might not be able to handle such a storm. The conductor brought his baton down. The orchestra began the opening theme, a dark Russian melody that builds slowly. Then the moment came. It was the moment the piano enters. The audience stopped breathing. Would the sound be weak? Would his fingers stumble? Horowitz's hands came down. The sound that exploded from the piano wasn't weak. It was huge. It was a roar that cut through the orchestra like a laser. The notes weren't just fast. They were singing. Every single note had a personality, a shape, and a color. The piano seemed to be alive. The old man hunched over the keyboard, his face intense, his eyes locked on his fingers. He wasn't looking at the music. He didn't need to. He knew this piece better than he knew his own name. In the first few minutes, all the fear evaporated. The drama of the piano swap, the yelling backstage, the nerves had all vanished. There was only the music. The conductor, who had been so angry just minutes before, was now mesmerized. He stopped worrying about the time and the cameras. He started to follow the pianist. Usually the conductor leads, but this time Horowitz was leading. He was pulling the music out of the air, and the conductor and the orchestra were rushing to keep up with him. It felt less like a rehearsal and more like a chase, a thrilling high-speed chase through a landscape of beautiful sound. The sorcerer had arrived, and he had just begun to cast a spell. As the music moved past the introduction, something impossible began to happen. The old man, who had walked onto the stage with slow, careful steps, seemed to shed 40 years of age right in front of everyone's eyes. It was as if the music itself was giving him life. His fingers, which had been trembling just minutes ago, turned into streaks of lightning. They were dancing across the keyboard with a speed that was hard to follow. It wasn't just playing. It was a blur of motion, like a magician shuffling cards so fast you can't see his hands. The sound coming from the piano was filling the massive hall. It was loud, but it wasn't harsh. It was a singing, soaring sound that seemed to go on forever. The conductor was facing the orchestra, his back to the audience, but you could see the shock on his face. He was conducting vigorously, trying to keep the orchestra together, but he kept glancing over his shoulder at the piano. Couldn't believe his ears. The orchestra, which was full of excellent young musicians, was struggling to be heard over this one elderly man. The piano was drowning them out, but not in a rude way. It was like a tidal wave of sound that lifted everyone up. Horowitz was leaning over the keys, his face intense. He wasn't looking at the audience. He wasn't looking at the conductor. His eyes were locked on his hands as if he were watching a surgeon perform an operation. Sometimes his face would twist into a grimace, not of pain, but of pure effort, as if he was physically pulling the sound out of the strings. Other times a look of pure joy would flash across his features. He was sweating now. The physical effort of playing this difficult music was immense, but he wasn't stopping. He was pushing through barriers that usually exist only in young, super-athletic bodies. The people in the audience were mesmerized. You could feel a shift in the room. The tension of the earlier delay was completely gone, replaced by a sense of awe. The people in the cheap seats, the ones high up in the balconies, were standing up. They couldn't sit still. They had to see what was happening. It felt like a religious revival. There were gasps when he hit the incredibly fast passages, the notes cascading down the keyboard like a waterfall of pearls. It didn't sound human. It sounded like a supernatural force had taken over the old man's body. The conductor, usually the boss of the concert, had become a follower. He was watching Horowitz's hands for the tempo. If Horowitz sped up, the conductor snapped his baton faster. If Horowitz slowed down to linger on a beautiful, soft note, the orchestra waited for him. It was a complete role reversal. The conductor realized that he wasn't leading a performance. He was witnessing a miracle. He was guiding the orchestra to accompany a sorcerer. There was a moment where the conductor actually smiled, a small, genuine smile of disbelief. He forgot about the yelling, the stress, and the cameras. He was just enjoying the ride. What was most amazing was the range of emotions in the music. 1 second, the piano was gentle and whispery, like a mother singing a lullaby. The next second, it was roaring like a lion. Horowitz was making the piano cry and laugh all in the same measure. The spare piano, the one that nobody wanted, was singing with a heart and soul that the shiny, perfect piano couldn't match. It was as if the instrument had been waiting its whole life just for this moment, just for this man to play it. The sound was warm and dark, and full of colors that painted pictures in the air. The heat from the stage lights was beating down, but nobody cared. The musicians in the orchestra were leaning forward, grinning at each other. They were playing better than they ever had before, inspired by the legend in front of them. They weren't just playing notes on a page. They were telling a story. The story was about a man coming home, about the power of art to conquer time, and about the refusal to give up. Every difficult run of notes was a victory. Every loud chord was a shout of defiance against age and frailty. Horowitz's hands were moving so fast that they looked like they were vibrating. The air around the piano seemed to shimmer with energy. The sound was resonating in everyone's chest. It was a physical experience, not just a listening one. You'd feel the deep notes in your bones. The audience was swept away, floating on the river of music. Nobody was bored. Nobody was checking their watch or thinking about dinner. The The world outside the concert hall had ceased to exist. There was only the old man, the black piano, and the magic that was happening between them. The concert was no longer just a performance. It was an event that would be talked about for generations. The music rushed toward its final destination like a train heading down a mountain. It was the last movement of the concerto, the most dangerous and exciting part. The sound grew louder and more intense with every second. The old pianist was no longer sitting politely on the bench. He was swaying, his whole body rocking back and forth, caught in a storm of his own making. His arms rose high and crashed down on the keys, creating thunder that shook the walls of the conservatory. The conductor was swinging his baton with wild energy. The musicians of the orchestra, playing their hearts out, their bows flying across the strings, faces red with exertion. Then it happened. The final, ultimate chord. It wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow to the air. Horowitz slammed his hands down on the keys with a force that seemed impossible for a man his age. And then, instantly, he yanked them away, leaving the silence to rush back in. For a heartbeat, maybe two, the hall was completely still. It was a vacuum. No one spoke. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe. It was as if the audience had been collectively knocked out by the power of what they had just heard. 3,000 people were frozen in time, staring at the stage. The sound of the piano seemed to hang in the air, ghost-like, fading away slowly. Then the dam broke. The explosion of noise was deafening. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was a roar. It started from the back of the hall and rolled forward like a tidal wave. People leaped to their feet, shouting and cheering. It was a sound of pure, unfiltered joy. Some people were crying, wiping tears from their faces without even realizing it. Others were hugging the strangers sitting next to them. The tension that had plagued the concert from the very beginning, the arguing, the piano swap, the worry, it all dissolved into this massive release of emotion. The legend had returned, and he had proved everyone wrong. On stage, the conductor didn't just stand there. He turned around to face the pianist, a look of total shock and admiration on his face. He bowed deeply, not out of habit, but out of genuine respect. The man who had yelled, "Don't touch my piano," just an hour ago was now looking at Horowitz like a god. He knew he had witnessed history. He knew that his irritation didn't matter anymore. The music had won. Horowitz stood up slowly. The moment he stood, the fragile old man returned. His knees shook a little. He looked exhausted, pale and drained, as if he had just run a marathon. But his eyes were bright. They were shining with a mix of exhaustion and pure happiness. He reached down and picked up a bouquet of red roses that had been thrown at his feet. He held them against his chest like a shield. He walked to the front of the stage to accept the applause. The cheering went on and on. It wouldn't stop. The applause washed over him, warm and healing. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just blew a kiss to the audience, first to the left, then to the right. He blew a kiss to the orchestra, and a special kiss to the conductor. There were no hard feelings. The drama of the piano swap was forgotten, forgiven in the light of the miracle that had just occurred as he stood there, bathed in the yellow glow of the stage lights. Holding his flowers, you realized what this moment meant. It wasn't just about a guy playing a piano well. It was about the human spirit. It was about an old man refusing to let go of his passion, refusing to let his body dictate what he could or could not do. He had fought for the instrument that spoke to him, and in doing so, he had touched the souls of everyone in that room. The applause began to slow down, turning into a rhythmic clapping. The crowd wanted more, but Horowitz knew he was empty. He had given everything he had. There was no magic left in his hands tonight. He bowed one last time, a humble, slow bow, and turned to walk away. As he walked off the stage, leaning on the arm of an assistant, the giant black piano sat behind him, silent again. But it wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore. It was a vessel. The sorcerer had put his spell into it, and everyone who heard it would carry a piece of that spell with them forever. The concert was over, but the memory of that night, that impossible, glorious night would live on long after the old man was gone.